Paul had never been on a ship this large before. The flagship of the Tyrian Alliance was more like a moving city than a vessel. From the moment his small shuttle docked inside the vast hangar, he could feel the weight of order pressing down on him. Everything gleamed, polished to perfection. Rows of Tyrian soldiers moved in perfect steps, their silver armor catching the light like a sea of mirrors. Not a single sound was wasted. No one laughed, no one spoke without reason. It was as if the entire ship breathed in unison. Paul adjusted his plain navy uniform. Compared to the sharp angles and stiff collars of the Tyrian officers, his outfit looked almost lazy. But that was the way of humans. They carried themselves differently, less concerned with flawless presentation and more with comfort. He knew he stood out, and that was exactly why he had been chosen. The Earth Council believed humanity needed a presence inside the Alliance, a liaison, a bridge between species, someone who could learn, adapt, and represent the human way of thinking. He told himself he was ready. He had trained for months, studied Tyrian customs, memorized their gestures and formal greetings. But standing inside the hangar with hundreds of eyes turning toward him, he felt his chest tighten. At the far end of the hangar stood General Mira. Everyone in the galaxy had heard her name. She was the strategist who had never lost a battle. The Tyrians called her the Iron Star. Her fleet obeyed her without hesitation. Other species spoke of her with a mix of fear and respect. Paul had expected someone tall, perhaps intimidating, maybe even harsh in appearance. Instead, Mira stood with simple grace. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, her uniform pressed without a single crease. Her eyes, however, carried the weight of every campaign, sharp and unyielding. She did not smile. She did not frown. She simply observed, as though she were studying him the way she would study a battle map. He stepped forward, trying not to let his nerves show. The Tyrian soldiers watched as he raised his hand in the formal salute he had practiced 100 times. Human liaison. Paul reporting for duty. General Mira, he said. Her eyes flicked over him, quick as lightning. For a brief moment, Paul thought she would dismiss him without a word. Then she spoke, her voice steady, neither cruel nor warm. You will follow my command structure. You will observe, but you will not interfere without permission. You will adapt or you will be returned to your council. Do you understand? Yes, General, Paul answered. Mira gave a short nod, then turned. Her officers fell into step behind her with machine-like precision. Paul hurried after them, already feeling like a misfit in this world of flawless order. They moved through the corridors of the ship. Every surface shone with steel brightness. Holographic displays pulsed with streams of data in the Tyrian language. Soldiers stood at exact intervals, statues until ordered otherwise. Paul's ears strained for anything familiar. A cough, a laugh, even footsteps out of rhythm. But there was nothing. When they reached the bridge, Paul stopped in awe. The room stretched like an amphitheater, with tiers of stations circling a central command platform. Screens projected the starfield outside, along with tactical data. Officers sat at their posts in silence, their fingers moving across glowing panels with absolute focus. General Mira stepped onto the platform. The bridge crew rose in unison and saluted. Then as one, they sat again, their attention snapping back to their duties. Mira stood tall at the center, a pillar of calm control. Paul was shown to a small seat at the edge of the bridge. It was clear he was not part of the crew. He was a guest, tolerated but not trusted. He reminded himself this was only the beginning. Trust would take time. Hours passed as Mira directed routine drills. The fleet's movements appeared on the wide display, dozens of ships forming patterns with perfect accuracy. Every order was sharp, every response immediate. Paul found himself both impressed and unsettled. The Tyrians were flawless, but they were also rigid. He wondered what would happen if something unexpected occurred. As the drills continued, Paul leaned closer to his console. He whispered a comment under his breath, half to himself. They could use a little music in here. The officer beside him turned sharply as if Paul had broken some sacred law. Paul raised his hands quickly. Just saying. Humans work better with rhythm sometimes. The officer did not reply, but Paul caught the flicker of confusion in his eyes. It was the first crack he had seen in the wall of discipline. Later, when the shift ended, Mira called him aside. You spoke during drills, she said. her eyes steady. Paul swallowed. I did. I apologize if it was inappropriate. You find fault in our methods? Not fault, Paul said quickly. Just difference. Humans do better when things feel alive. We use music, humor, even small mistakes to push us forward. It helps us stay sharp in our own way. For the first time, Mira's expression changed. It was not a smile. It was not anger. It was something in between, a pause of thought. That is not how we operate. Here, precision is survival. I understand, Paul replied. But sometimes flexibility is survival too. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment, then she dismissed him with a wave. Return to your station. Paul did as ordered, but he could not shake the feeling that his words had left a mark. The next day, the bridge prepared for a patrol near a volatile border. Mira stood in command as always, issuing orders with perfect calm. Paul sat at his place silent this time, determined not to cause trouble. Yet when the fleet encountered a small pirate vessel, tension rose. The crew handled it with flawless precision, surrounding the ship, disabling its engines. Mira directed every movement, her voice sharp and clear. Paul watched her, fascinated. Her eyes burned with focus, her tone carried steel, and her posture was unbreakable. He could see why entire fleets followed her without question. She was like a storm in human form, commanding everything around her. The pirate ship tried to flee, and Mira's tone hardened. She snapped orders faster, her voice cutting through the air. The bridge crew moved like extensions of her will. Paul could not help himself. He leaned forward, watching the sharp fire in her eyes, the way her words carried absolute control. A grin slipped across his face. You're cute when you're angry, he said. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. The bridge went silent. Every officer froze, hands hovering above their controls. Even the hum of the ship seemed to pause. Mira turned, her eyes wide for the first time. Her cheeks flushed with sudden color, bright against her usual pale calm. The entire bridge crew stared, their perfect discipline broken by shock. Paul blinked, realizing what he had just done. He wanted to take it back, but it was too late. The words hung in the air like a shot fired in stillness. Mira's lips pressed into a thin line. She said nothing at first, but the red on her face betrayed her. The bridge crew exchanged quick glances as if they had seen something impossible. The Iron Star was human after all. Paul swallowed, bracing himself for the storm. The bridge remained frozen in silence. Every Tyrian officer stared straight ahead, their hands still hovering over the glowing panels. The hum of the engines seemed louder than ever, filling the pause that no one dared to break. Paul sat at his station, his heart pounding inside his chest. He had not meant to say it aloud, but the words had slipped out with ease. He had looked at Mira in the heat of command, seen the fire in her eyes, and his human instinct had simply spoken. But now, under the heavy gaze of an entire alien crew, he realized how much trouble he might be in. General Mira did not move at first. Her back was straight, her chin held high, but her cheeks glowed a deep red that none of her crew had ever seen before. The Tyrians were not a people known for emotional displays. To see their commander, the Iron Star herself, flustered was beyond belief. When Mira finally spoke, her voice was calm, but it carried the sharpness of a blade. Return to your duties. The crew snapped back into motion at once, their fingers racing across panels, their eyes fixed firmly on their screens. But Paul could sense it. The air of perfect discipline was cracked. The silence was no longer silence, but a silence filled with unspoken questions. The pirate vessel, still crippled in front of them, was quickly boarded and secured. Reports came in. The situation was resolved. Yet none of that mattered. What mattered was the sentence Paul had dropped like a meteor into the heart of the flagship. When Mira ended the operation and dismissed the crew, she turned her gaze toward him. Her eyes did not burn with anger, but neither were they calm. They held something new, something uncertain. Human liaison, she said. You will remain, Paul swallowed. He could feel the stares of the officers as they left the bridge. Some glanced at him with curiosity, others with thinly hidden amusement. It was as if they were carrying a story they would whisper later in their private quarters, a story about the human who dared speak to the Iron Star in such a way. Soon the bridge was empty except for Mira and Paul. The great star field stretched across the main display, stars cold and bright. Mira stepped closer, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor. Repeat what you said, she ordered. Paul hesitated. General, repeat it. Her eyes locked onto his, he sighed. I said, You're cute when you're angry. The words sounded even more reckless now that they echoed in the quiet bridge. Paul braced himself for the explosion of fury that should have followed. But instead, Mira's face reddened again, her composure cracking just slightly. "You will explain," she said. Paul scratched the back of his neck. It was a compliment. On Earth, we sometimes say things like that. It doesn't mean we don't respect the person. It just means we notice something different in them. Something human, something real. Mira's brow furrowed. "You insulted me in front of my crew." "No, General," Paul said quickly. "I didn't mean it as an insult. It was admiration in a way. You command with such strength, but in that moment you reminded me of something familiar. I spoke without thinking. Humans do that sometimes. We speak from the heart before we measure our words." Her eyes narrowed, but she did not speak. Instead, she turned away and faced the starfield. For a long time, she stood there in silence, and Paul wondered if she was considering whether to throw him off the ship entirely. Finally, she said, "You are reckless. Words carry weight here. A general does not allow herself to be reduced to." "Cute." Paul almost laughed, but caught himself. "I understand. But maybe your crew saw something they needed to see. They saw you as more than a symbol. They saw you as a person." Mira spun back toward him, her eyes sharp. "A symbol is what holds them together. If they see weakness, was it weakness?" Paul asked softly, her words caught in her throat. For the briefest moment, her eyes betrayed doubt. Then she straightened again. "You will not speak such words again. Do you understand?" "Yes, General," Paul said. She gave a sharp nod, then walked away, leaving him alone on the bridge. The next morning, Paul noticed something different in the way the crew looked at him. When he entered the mess hall, conversations paused. Some officers studied him with stern expressions, but others let the corners of their mouths twitch upward, almost like they were suppressing smiles. He could hear whispers in the Tyrian tongue, short words passed from table to table. He caught one phrase repeated several times, "Iron Star Red." He had started something without meaning to. When he sat down with his tray, a young officer leaned across the table. Her voice was quiet but curious. "What is cute?" Paul blinked. "It means something that makes you smile. Something you find endearing. Like a child's laugh or a small animal or someone who looks fierce but in a way that makes you want to be closer, not further." The officer tilted her head, trying to translate it into her own culture's frame of thought. "You said this to the general?" "Yes," Paul admitted. "I probably shouldn't have." Her lips twitched again as if she was holding back laughter. She quickly stood and left, but Paul noticed the way she hurried to whisper to her companions. The story was spreading faster than he could control. By the time he returned to the bridge, Paul could feel the ripple it had caused. The crew did not speak out of turn, but their eyes told the story. They had all heard. And more importantly, they had all seen something they never imagined possible. Their general turning red. That day, Mira called a strategy meeting. The officers assembled in the planning chamber, a wide room with a circular display table at its center. Paul was invited to observe. The discussion was tense. Reports came in of increased raids along the border. Rival powers were testing the alliance, searching for weak points. The Tyrian officers presented their plans with perfect structure. Patrol schedules, defense formations, mathematical predictions. Every plan was flawless on paper. But Paul noticed the same thing he had felt before. It was all too rigid. There was no room for the unexpected. When Mira asked if there were questions, Paul hesitated. He knew he should stay quiet, but something inside pushed him to speak. "With respect," he said, "these plans look perfect, but what if the enemy doesn't follow the rules? What if they do something crazy? Something no one expects?" The officers turned to him, their eyes hard. To them, chaos was weakness. To them, the idea of straying from the perfect plan was madness. Mira studied him. "And what would you suggest, human?" Paul took a breath. "Flexibility. Sometimes you win not by being stronger, but by being unpredictable. On Earth, we say the best strategy is the one your opponent never sees coming." The room was silent. Several officers shifted uncomfortably. They were not used to this kind of thinking. Mira's gaze lingered on him. For a moment, Paul thought she would dismiss him, perhaps even reprimand him, but instead she gave a small nod. "Noted," she said simply. Then she returned to the plans, her tone unchanged. Yet Paul noticed the way her eyes flickered, the way her mind seemed to turn over the thought. She had heard him even if she did not admit it openly. Later that evening, Paul was summoned to Mira's quarters. The room was as strict as its owner. A desk with perfectly arranged datapads, a single bed, walls bare except for the emblem of the Tyrian fleet. She stood by the desk, arms folded. "Your word spread through the ship," she said. Paul rubbed his neck. "I figured they might. You disrupted discipline. The crew is unsettled. And yet," Paul said carefully, "they're also more alive. I saw it. They're curious, talking, asking questions. That's not weakness. That's spirit." Mira's eyes narrowed. "Spirit does not win battles. Order does." "Maybe both do," Paul replied. For the first time, Mira did not answer immediately. She stared at him, her face unreadable. Then she turned away, speaking more softly. "You are not like us, human, and yet you may not be entirely wrong." Paul felt a flicker of hope. Mira finally faced him again, her expression firm once more. "But know this. If your presence undermines my command, you will be removed. No more careless words, no more disruptions." "I understand," Paul said. She dismissed him, but as he left, he caught the faintest trace of color still lingering in her cheeks. The Tyrian flagship moved silently through the stars, its silver hull shining under distant suns. To anyone watching from afar, it looked like perfection, a ship without flaw, guided by the strictest discipline. But inside its steel heart, whispers had begun to stir. It started with one word: cute. A simple human word, but one that had no proper translation in the Tyrian language. Officers repeated it quietly in corridors, mess halls, and shared quarters. Some tried to explain it through logic. Others struggled to understand it through emotion. The meaning slipped away each time, yet curiosity only grew stronger. Paul noticed it everywhere. When he walked past groups of officers, their eyes followed him. Some narrowed with suspicion, others softened with amusement. A few even attempted shy questions, though never when Mira was near. The human had become a subject of quiet fascination. Mira, however, remained silent about the incident. She carried herself with the same commanding presence, her voice steady, her orders precise. Yet her crew could not forget the sight of her cheeks turning red. For them, it had been like watching a statue come alive. One evening, in the mess hall, Paul was approached by a young officer named Lauren. Her posture was stiff, her voice careful, but her eyes were filled with curiosity. "Human liaison," she said. "Tell me again. What is cute?" Paul put down his tray. "It's hard to explain. It's not strength. It's not weakness either. It's something that makes you want to smile, something that feels warm even if the person doesn't mean it." Lauren frowned. "Warm like fire?" "Not fire," Paul said. "More like sunlight after cold. You feel safe but also surprised. That's what I meant when I said it to the general." Lauren's eyes widened. "You felt safe when she was angry?" Paul laughed lightly. "In a strange way, yes. She was powerful, but she reminded me of something human. It made me feel closer to her, not afraid." Lauren tilted her head, clearly wrestling with the idea. "Strange. We do not seek closeness with our generals. We serve them. That's the difference," Paul said. "Humans lead by earning trust. Sometimes that means showing emotions, even by accident. It makes people believe their leader is real, not just a machine." Lauren nodded slowly, though her eyes still showed confusion. "Perhaps this is why your kind fights differently. Not with perfect order, but with feeling." Paul smiled. "Exactly." By the next day, Paul noticed the whispers had spread further. Some officers looked at Mira differently now. They obeyed her without question, but behind their sharp salutes he could see something new: respect mixed with affection. It was subtle, but it was there. Mira, of course, noticed too. She summoned Paul to her office once more. The room was as plain as ever, with clean walls and strict order. Mira stood behind her desk, her arms crossed. "You are interfering with the crew," she said flatly. Paul raised his hands. "I'm not trying to. They're curious. They ask me questions. I just answer." "Your words spread," Mira said. "They distract my officers from their duties." "Or maybe they make your officers stronger," Paul replied carefully. "They see you as more than a symbol now. They see you as a leader who can feel. That doesn't weaken them. It inspires them." Mira's eyes narrowed. "Inspiration does not win battles. Discipline does. Maybe both can," Paul said quietly. For a moment, Mira said nothing. Her gaze was sharp, but her silence carried thought. Finally, she dismissed him with a wave of her hand. Yet as Paul left, he could not shake the feeling that she had listened even if she refused to admit it. A week later, the fleet entered a contested system near the border of rival space. Tension filled the air as reports came in of strange movements. Unknown ships had been spotted, raiders or scouts, no one was sure. On the bridge, Mira stood in her usual place, calm and precise. The crew moved with flawless order, but Paul could sense something in the air. The crew's eyes flicked toward Mira more often than before, as if waiting to see if the Iron Star would crack again. When the alert sounded, the bridge lit with warning lights. A cluster of hostile vessels appeared on the sensors, moving with erratic patterns. They darted like insects, not following any clear formation. The Tyrian fleet formed its standard defensive wall, but the enemy ships broke apart, circling in ways the Tyrians had not prepared for. Orders flew from Mira's mouth, sharp as blades. The crew obeyed instantly, but the enemy's chaos made their perfect structure falter. Ships collided with patterns they could not predict. The wall began to bend under the strange assault. Paul watched the display, his heart racing. He could see it clearly. The enemy was unpredictable. They were using chaos itself as a weapon. The Tyrian discipline was strong, but it was brittle against madness. He leaned forward. "General, they're not following rules. You can't trap them with a perfect wall. You need to break formation, scatter, and strike from angles they don't expect." Mira turned her head sharply. "That is disorder." "It's survival," Paul said. "You taught your fleet to move like one body, but now they're fighting against a storm. The only way to beat a storm is to become the wind." Her eyes locked onto his. The crew froze, waiting to see if she would silence him. The Iron Star never accepted advice, especially from an outsider. For a long moment, Mira's lips pressed into a line. Then, to everyone's shock, she gave a single sharp nod. "Break formation," she commanded. "Scatter into attack wings. Strike from unexpected angles now." The bridge crew hesitated only a heartbeat before obeying. Ships broke apart from the flawless wall, darting into new shapes. Confusion rippled through the enemy lines as the Tyrians attacked with sudden unpredictability. Their disciplined precision turned into sharp bursts of chaos, guided by Mira's voice but inspired by something new. Within minutes, the battle turned. The raiders, unprepared for such a shift, faltered. One by one, their ships were disabled or driven away. The Tyrian fleet, though battered, stood victorious. A cheer rose across the bridge, something Paul had never heard before. The crew shouted with pride, their voices filled with both discipline and joy. Mira stood tall, her face unreadable. Yet Paul noticed the faintest redness in her cheeks once again. That evening, word spread like wildfire. The crew spoke of the battle, but more importantly, they spoke of the moment Mira trusted the humans' words. The Iron Star had listened, and the fleet had triumphed. For many officers, it was the first time they had seen their general not just as a symbol, but as a leader willing to adapt. The word cute returned to whispers, but now it carried respect. It was not mockery. It was affection. Paul sat alone in the mess hall when several officers approached him. Lauren was among them, her posture still stiff but her eyes bright. "You saved us," she said. "I didn't," Paul replied. "Your general did. She made the choice." "But you gave her the idea," another officer said. "Without it, we might have lost." Paul shook his head. "I only reminded her that sometimes strength comes from change." She already had the courage to act. The officers exchanged looks, then one of them leaned forward. "Perhaps humans are not as strange as we thought." Paul smiled. "We're strange, but sometimes strange is useful." The officers left, but Paul could feel the shift in the air. He was no longer just an outsider. He was becoming part of the fleet. Later, Mira summoned him to her quarters again. She stood with her back to him, looking out through the small viewport at the stars. "You took a risk," she said. "If you had been wrong, we would have lost ships." "I know," Paul said. "But you trusted me." Her shoulders tensed. "I trusted the possibility, not you." Paul stepped closer. "Maybe both." For a moment, the silence stretched between them. Then Mira turned, her eyes steady but softer than before. "Your words are dangerous. They unsettle order, but today they saved lives." "I will not forget that," Paul nodded. "Thank you, General." Her gaze lingered on him. For the first time, she allowed a tiny smile to touch her lips, so faint it could have been a trick of the light. But Paul saw it. You will continue to observe, she said, her tone firm again. But know this. If you ever speak without thought again, I will not protect you from the consequences. Paul grinned. Understood. She shook her head almost as if amused, then dismissed him. As Paul left her quarters, he felt something shift inside him. He was not just a liaison anymore. He was part of something bigger, a change rippling through the Tyrian fleet, one that began with a single careless sentence. And though Mira tried to bury it under her iron discipline, Paul could see it clearly now. The Iron Star was beginning to shine in a new way. The Tyrian fleet had barely recovered from the skirmish with the raiders when the alarm came. Scouts reported the approach of a rival empire's task force, larger and more organized than anything the fleet had faced in decades. On the flagship, the bridge hummed with tension. Officers moved with precise steps, but the air was heavy with anticipation. Mira stood at the center, her posture as rigid as the day Paul had arrived. Her eyes scanned every detail of the displays. The enemy fleet was advanced, aggressive, and unpredictable. If the Tyrians tried to use only their traditional formations, they would be outflanked and outmaneuvered. Paul sat at his station, watching the holographic projection of the approaching ships. Every instinct in him told him the Tyrians' rigid strategies would fail against this enemy. Their strength lay in discipline, but their weakness was in flexibility. Mira's voice rang out, precise and commanding. Formation Delta, prepare for engagement. All units maintain assigned positions. Do not deviate unless instructed. Paul's fingers twitched. He wanted to speak, to suggest a different approach, but he hesitated. After the last incident, he had learned to measure his words carefully. Yet as the enemy fleet drew nearer, his mind raced. He leaned forward. General, the enemy's movements are unpredictable. They will exploit our formations. We cannot rely only on standard tactics. Mira's eyes cut toward him. Are you questioning my orders? No, General, Paul said quickly. I only wish to offer an alternative. We can adjust and surprise them. It might give us the advantage we need. For a moment, Mira said nothing. Her lips pressed together, her jaw tight. The officers around them tensed, waiting for her to respond. To question a general was forbidden, and to challenge her in the heat of an incoming battle could have been considered treason. Finally, Mira spoke, her tone steady but carrying a rare note of deliberation. Explain your plan. Paul took a deep breath. If we break the fleet into smaller wings, scatter them, and strike from multiple angles, the enemy will be forced to respond to uncertainty. We keep communication tight, but each wing moves unpredictably. We maintain control, but we abandon strict patterns. The enemy will be off balance, and we can gain the upper hand. Mira's eyes narrowed. Chaos under my command? Controlled chaos, Paul corrected. The fleet follows you. You direct the overall strategy, but flexibility within that framework can give us the edge. The bridge went silent. The officers exchanged glances, some shocked, others intrigued. Paul could see the same hesitation in Mira's face. For the first time, she was considering a path beyond the one she had always trusted. Very well, she said finally. We will attempt it. You will guide the wing movements, human. Paul felt a mixture of relief and tension. This was his chance to prove humanity's value to the Tyrian fleet. One wrong move, and it would be his last. The battle began moments later. The enemy ships charged in perfect coordination, assuming the Tyrians would respond in their usual formations. At first, the fleet moved, as always, a wall of gleaming ships. But then Mira's voice cut through the comms with precise instructions. Scatter wings Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. Attack from unexpected positions. Distract and confuse. Follow the human's lead. Paul's station came alive with data. He coordinated each wing, sending orders, predicting enemy reactions, and adjusting paths in real time. It was unlike anything the Tyrians had ever done. Their discipline held, but their movements were no longer predictable. The enemy faltered immediately. Their formations broke apart as the wings struck from odd angles. One Tyrian destroyer appeared from behind a large asteroid belt, unseen until it fired. Another group used the shadows of a planet to emerge suddenly, disabling several enemy ships. Controlled chaos reigned. On the bridge, Mira's eyes remained sharp. She issued commands with precision, but she also allowed the human to make decisions to guide the wings. It was a test for both of them, a test of trust and skill. The battle intensified. Enemy ships adapted, but Paul and Mira were faster. Each move was countered with another, each strike calculated yet unpredictable. Paul could feel his heart pounding as the strategy unfolded. He had never directed an entire fleet in battle, yet here he was, trusted to guide some of the most advanced vessels in the galaxy. Then a warning flashed on the main display. An enemy cruiser was heading straight for the flagship. It was fast and powerful, and its trajectory would have allowed it to pierce the defenses. Paul's fingers hovered over his console. "General, we need to divert it now." "It will hit the command platform if we do nothing." Mira's eyes flickered. "Do it," he issued the orders. 2 wings broke formation and moved to intercept, drawing the enemy away from the flagship. Explosions lit the stars as the cruiser was neutralized. Paul exhaled, the tension in his body releasing slightly, though he knew the battle was far from over. Hours passed in this relentless dance of ships and strategy. The enemy fleet, though strong, could not match the unpredictability of Mira's fleet under Paul's guidance. Slowly, systematically, the Tyrians gained the upper hand. One by one, enemy ships were disabled or forced to retreat. Finally, the last ship of the enemy fleet attempted to flee. Mira ordered pursuit, but she allowed the humans' wings to flank from unexpected angles. The final ship was cornered and surrendered. The Tyrian fleet emerged victorious, battered but triumphant. The bridge erupted with cheers, something Paul had never heard on a Tyrian ship. Officers clapped each other on the back, voices raised in celebration, pride shining in their eyes. Mira stood tall, her expression unreadable. Paul noticed, however, that her cheeks carried a faint flush once more. The Iron Star had trusted a human, and together, they had saved the fleet. Later in her quarters, Mira faced Paul. Her arms were crossed, her voice firm, but there was something softer beneath it. "You took a risk," she said. "We both did," Paul replied. She studied him. "If you had been wrong, many would have died." "I know," Paul said. "But we were right, together." Mira's eyes lingered on him. For a brief moment, she allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You are reckless, human. But you remind me that strength is more than rules. It is also adaptability." Paul nodded. "That is why humans survive. We improvise. We make mistakes, but we learn from them quickly. That is what I hope to show your fleet." Mira turned away, looking out the viewport. The stars stretched endlessly, cold and bright. "Your kind is strange," she said softly. "Yet effective," Paul smiled. "Thank you, General." For the first time, Mira allowed herself a moment of thought that was not strategy. She considered the human sitting in her quarters, the boldness of his words and the courage it took to speak them. She also considered her crew, now seeing her in a new light, not only as the Iron Star but as a being capable of trust and emotion. It was dangerous, she knew. Trust could weaken discipline if mishandled, but it could also strengthen it if managed wisely. And that night, Mira realized that humanity brought something the Tyrians had rarely experienced: perspective, flexibility, and the courage to take risks that could save lives. Paul left her quarters that evening, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He had not only survived the test but had earned a place of respect among the crew. They no longer saw him as merely a human liaison. They saw him as part of the fleet, someone whose ideas could influence the outcome of battles. In the days that followed, the crew spoke in hushed tones about the battle. Mira's actions, guided in part by Paul, had changed their perception of leadership. They realized that strength was not only in control but also in the willingness to adapt, to trust, and to listen. Even Mira herself could not deny the subtle shift. She remained the Iron Star, commanding with precision and discipline, yet the seed of flexibility had been planted. The bridge crew, too, had changed. They looked at their general differently, and perhaps they looked at humanity differently as well. Paul continued his duties with a mixture of observation and guidance, careful not to overstep, but ready to act when the moment demanded. He had learned that respect was earned through courage, honesty, and occasionally a well-timed word. And the word that had started it all, cute, remained in the whispers of the fleet. But it was no longer a word of mockery. It had become a symbol of something rare, something human, and something capable of changing even the most disciplined hearts in the galaxy. Ryan stood tall on the wide bridge of the Zorath flagship. His words still hung in the air. The silence stretched like a rope pulled tight. The crew sat at their glowing control panels, yet no one dared to move a hand. Their eyes flicked between the human envoy and their star general. The crew had served under General Vera for many cycles. They knew her as strict, unbending, and unshaken in any storm of war. But now her face, usually cold and stern, had flushed with a strange color. It was not anger alone. It was something new, something even the proud Zorath warriors did not have a word for. The human had said something no one dared to say. He had looked into the eyes of their feared commander and told her, "You're cute when you're angry." The weight of the moment pressed on every soldier. Some expected punishment, others expected laughter, but all expected something loud. Instead, they got silence. Rian did not flinch. His calm smile held, not arrogant, not mocking, but steady. It was the smile of a man who knew the power of honesty, even when it seemed foolish. General Vera's hands gripped the railing in front of her command seat. Her sharp eyes stayed on Rian. For a long breath, the bridge was frozen. Then she spoke, her voice low but firm. "Human," she said, "you stand on my ship before my crew, and you dare speak to me with such bold words. Why?" Her question carried no rage, only curiosity mixed with disbelief. Rian's smile softened. "Because that is what humans do. We speak with truth, even when the truth surprises others. You asked why my people fight so hard. This is why. We do not fear speaking our hearts, not even to generals." The crew stirred, their whispers rising like wind. No alien had ever dared to talk this way. Vera lifted a hand and the whispers died at once. Her gaze sharpened as she studied Rian. "And you think this boldness is strength?" "Yes," Rian said, his tone clear. "Strength is not only in ships and weapons. Strength is also in spirit. When we are honest, when we dare to laugh even in fear, we show that no chain can bind us. That is why humans resist even against greater fleets. That is why we do not break." The bridge crew sat still, but their hearts moved. His words reached into them like a light in a dark place. One young officer at the side panel leaned close to another and whispered, "He is not like us. He does not bow, yet he does not insult. How can that be?" Another replied, "Maybe this is what gives his kind their fire. Maybe this is why they are not crushed." Vera heard none of these whispers, but she felt the shift. The crew was no longer staring at Rian as an odd creature. They were staring at him as something rare. The general straightened her back and asked again, "Tell me more, human. Tell me what gives your people this courage." Rian's eyes did not leave hers. His voice carried across the bridge. "Long ago, humans were small tribes on a dangerous world. The storms, the beasts, the hunger all tried to end us. But we worked together. We built fire, we built shelter, we built hope. We fought not only with strength but with our will. We learned that no matter how many times the storm comes, if we stand side by side and laugh in its face, we can survive. That is human courage." The crew listened as if under a spell. They had heard many speeches from generals, many words from leaders, but this was different. This was not command. This was spirit. Vera's face stayed firm, yet her mind turned. She had fought many battles, commanded many fleets, but never had she seen courage expressed this way. To her, courage was discipline, obedience, and the weight of command. But the human spoke of laughter and fear, of bold honesty in the face of power. She realized something. This man had not come to bow. He had come to stand. The silence returned after his words. Then a sound broke it. It was not the sound of weapons, not the sound of orders, but the sound of a quiet chuckle. A Zorath officer at the rear had laughed, short and nervous, but real. All eyes turned to him. He looked down quickly, ashamed. Yet the sound had already spread through the bridge like a spark. A few others let out soft laughs, not mocking but surprised, almost relieved. They were laughing at the strangeness of it all. Rian did not laugh. He only stood, his calm smile steady as if he had expected this. Vera raised a hand again. The laughter stopped at once, yet something had changed in the air. The fear had lifted, replaced by curiosity, maybe even respect. The general stepped closer to Rian, her boots echoing on the floor. She stood before him, tall and commanding, her eyes searching his. "You are strange, human," she said at last, "but I see now why your kind has not fallen. You carry fire inside you, and that fire cannot be chained." Rian nodded. "And that fire is why we seek not only to fight but to make bonds. Even with those who were once enemies." Her eyes narrowed, testing his words. "You would make bonds with us?" "With the Zorath who have brought war to your stars. If we can laugh together, if we can speak honestly together, then yes," Rian answered. "Bonds can be made. War does not last forever, but respect can." The crew felt a wave pass through them. Their general, the one they had always seen as unshakable, now stood not as a wall against this human but as a mirror to his words. Vera turned slowly, facing her crew. Her voice rose clear and strong. "Hear me, warriors of the Zorath. Today a human has stood before us without fear. He has shown us that strength is not only steel and fire. Strength is also spirit. Remember this. The enemy we face is not weak. They are brave in ways we did not understand." The crew straightened in their seats, listening closely. Never before had their general spoken in such a way. She turned back to Ryan. Her face still held its firm mask, but her eyes had changed. There was a hint of something warmer there, a recognition. "You, human," she said, "may one day be the bridge between our stars. But know this, you will not find it easy. You will be tested again and again. Are you ready for that?" Ryan's answer came without hesitation. "I am ready, because that is what it means to be human." The words rang through the bridge like a bell. For a long breath, no one moved. Then slowly the crew began to nod one by one. Not all at once, not with loud voices, but with quiet respect. They did not cheer, for the Zorath were not a people of cheering. But they nodded, and in that nod was acceptance. Vera gave a final command. "Return to your stations. We will continue our course." The crew obeyed, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was alive with thought, with change. As Ryan stood on the bridge, he felt the shift. He knew the Zorath would not see humans the same way again. His bold words had not broken their discipline, but they had planted a seed of respect. General Vera took her seat, but her eyes flicked once more to Ryan. The smallest curve touched her lips, gone in a breath, but real. It was not the smile of a commander, not the mask of a leader, but the first hint of something human. And though the war still burned across the stars, on this bridge, in this moment, a different fire had begun to glow.